Hello and welcome this evening. Be awesome at facility management listeners, followers, watchers. I'm your host, Joshua Peach. We've got a big episode here tonight. Before I introduce my co-host and our awesome guest, I do want to take a moment. This is going to be a tough episode. I think we're going to get into some things that are going to be, tough to talk about and think about. I think it's any day, not just a day that follows up from a tragedy like we had in Texas yesterday. But before we get started, I do want to take a quick moment of silence and honor for the 21 families that woke up with unimaginable pain this morning. So we're going to take a moment of silence for them. Well, here we go, guys. Paul, welcome back. My co-host with the most, Paul Anastasi, on the other end of the screen. How are you doing, my friend?
Hanging in. Just, remembering these days, working in facilities in schools when the day after isn't easy for the facilities guys.
No.
Keeping them in our thoughts too, because they need to. They get all the calls this morning. The phones were ringing off the hook, I'm sure.
Yeah. I have this incredible honor of having to introduce our guest tonight, who we met accidentally on purpose. Police Officer John Bonney, episode 4, reached out to me because he was telling me about this awesome human being named Dean Jenkins, who I knew the name. I couldn't figure out why. Was a Stoughton police officer at the time. And he was starting this movement called Supply the Why and having difficult conversations. And we ended up becoming great friends, but didn't realize that we were friends potentially in high school, but we just didn't know it. And maybe we weren't paying attention to each other's names. But Dean, Deputy Police Chief of the Boston Housing Authority today, still the founder of just an incredible program, Supply the Why, having difficult conversations. Welcome to the Be Awesome at FM podcast, my friend.
Josh, thanks for having me. Paul, thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be here with you, gentlemen, and I'm just looking forward to contribute in any way that I can.
Yeah, we planned this weeks in advance. We had Paul Tim on Friday. Paul Tim is one of the top safety and security consultants in the country, specific to schools. I called him yesterday. We launched his podcast at 8 a.m. yesterday morning, and I called him at 2:30 in the afternoon after the news of the shootings happened. And I said to him, when I release these podcasts, or when I release something that you and I do, Paul, I have this elation. I have this this feeling of comfort that something's being done, that we're making greater efforts and strides. And then something like yesterday happens, and it just takes all the wind out of your sails. And I question having this podcast today, but I think it's important. And Dean, you said it. If we wait for the right time, there'll never be a right time, right? So
correct.
So we want to cover a couple of bases, Dean. You and I have talked about this before. The importance of an SRO officer in a school district. I want to couple that with the importance of the relationship of whether it's an SRO officer, because there aren't SRO officers in every school building, but the importance of the first responder police officers and the facilities department, the importance of that synergy, that relationship, and then some of the things, best practices, experiences that you've had in your world as to how that all ties in and works.
All right, so let me take little bites here. So the first thing I'll start out with is the importance of a school resource officer. I think it goes without saying that you'd rather have one than not when you have an unspeakable day, like what happened yesterday in Texas. It's the type of thing where not only is having a school resource officer a safety measure and an automatic barrier to people that intend to do harm, but it's also great for building relationships and bridges with the community. There's no better way to, get children to understand more of what we do and more of the importance of partnerships with police officers, firefighters, and other authority members throughout their jurisdiction, then when you get that one-on-one bond that you get as a school resource officer, when they're seeing beyond your uniform, they're seeing
Right.
that there is in fact a person underneath there, and I just can't stress enough how important it is to have that.
Yeah, well, and that's where we were going to go with this before yesterday happened, which is that human aspect, and something that you and I talked about, and I actually talked to John Bonney about it, because I was comfortable asking the question, but I suspect that other people aren't comfortable asking the question, which is this big conversation about, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I ask you, why aren't there more Black police officers? And your answer was, find me five people, five Black people that want to be a police officer. Find that, and
That aren't already police officers.
Right? Mm-hmm. Find them for me, and where are they? And I think it starts with that ground level relationship that police officers are human beings too, and it's that direct tie-in the school building. It's not just the protection aspect, the armed protection aspect for things that happened yesterday, but it's a human aspect and the interaction with the students that is extremely important. I don't know if I ever told you this, and you might have been one of the people that was shooting at me, but Stoughton used to have a drill, a multi-day active shooter drill in the old high school. They used you used actual Glocks that were loaded with bullets that shot antifreeze or soap or something. They hurt like hell.
Simunition guns, yeah.
Yeah, and I was one of the active shooters. And what I did,
kick you out of a crowd for that, Josh? How did that happen?
No, I asked for it. I
you
couldn't. I
usually
did.
do.
Yeah, no. Well, I asked for it for a couple of reasons, and it's going to be one of the questions I asked Dean. I asked for it because at the time this is about 10 years ago, and I wanted to understand how police understood facilities, because they drive by them every day. They get called for fights and for kids that want to do harm to themselves and things, and they walk in and they typically go into the front office. But how well do they know the schools? And it was partly because I was experiencing and seeing in my travels that there wasn't a lot of communication in some aspects with the police when renovations, additions, changes, new buildings come into play. I mean, we're talking about space. People can get lost in a 1,500 square foot house if they don't know the layout of it. We're talking about 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 square feet. I wanted to see how that training and how that was all being put into place and transitioning into, okay, something happened. We can say it's the west corner, but how do we know that our school building is labeled properly, that the classroom is W207, which means the west corridor, second floor building, room 7, right? Are we communicating that right? So it was more of a learning lesson for me, because they actually had officers from Stoughton and other communities, I think, right, Dean?
So that was before me. That preceded my time in Stoughton. So my guess is that there were other officers from other agencies there as well, if it was as big of an operation as you said.
Yeah, I was on Channel 7 News. It was it was a pretty big deal. I actually hit the reporter square between the legs accidentally with a shot.
Yeah, those things sting too. So
it does. Yeah, even if you wear baggy clothes and everything. But with your experience, what are questions that police officers should be asking the facilities professionals in schools? And what would you think would be good information for facilities departments to be continually providing and does that happen? Did you see that happen? Do you see that happening where there's a flow of information, key access, master keys, all that stuff? Because I don't know the answers to that stuff.
So I'm a perfect person to talk up to about this, because I had the luxury of when since we're talking about my time in Stoughton, when I first got on in Stoughton, it was the old high school. So it was the one that I went to. Yep. So to your point that we talked backstage a little bit about, a lot of people that happen to be on the force went to Stoughton High School at some point. So that obviously is a big help, because we knew it inside and out just because of our time there. But what we did was, when there was people that weren't from town, part of the field training process is we tried to get them through the high school at some point, just so they could at least have an idea of how it's laid out. It's not going to be perfect. You're not going to memorize everything, but at least you'll have an idea of how many floors there are, roughly where the exits are, and where some of the points that you want to pay a little bit more attention to are in the building. Now, your second point about what should we be asking the facilities, we should be collaborating with the facilities folks at least biannually. You know, just talking about any changes, even if it is, hey, these doors, we have issues at these doors and not these doors. This needs an alarm. When there's construction going on, who's doing the deliveries, what kind of materials are in the school. That's all stuff that needs to be conveyed to your first responders, both police and fire, because as things like that change, that could change the tactics that are used in entering these schools. So it's vital that we have great relationships with the facilities folks.
I know when I learned my first responder stuff as a facilities person, it was back in the 90s. We were going through the bomb scare days. Yep. And I found that it was invaluable to have either a facilities person, a custodian with the team. And what we did here in Watertown is they put a firefighter, a police officer, and a school person, a facilities person. And one for layout, but we could learn the layout, like you said, but two for the person that's in the building every day. Something small will look out of place to that person. And, a police officer can go in the boiler room and it's usually a mess, right? But the guy that works in that boiler room knows his mess. Mm-hmm. He knows what's there. And if there's something out of place, he knows it. And we would even go as far as going into a classroom. If there was something that looked out of place, bringing that teacher in to that classroom and tell us, what's it look like? Is there something out of place here? Because it looks out of place to us, but it might not be to them. And one of the actual things that happened during a bomb scare was we found looked like a small suitcase in a classroom, and it just looked out of place. It wasn't neatly put into the shelf. It was just there. And we brought the teacher in and brought her as far as the door and said, this case looks out of place. And she said that back in the days of they were still using CDs back then. That was a language lab. And it's in that case was the DVD player and all the discs for the kids to learn their language. But I could look at that all day, and I wouldn't know that without opening it. And I'm not going to open it. No one that was with that group was going to open it, but the teacher identified it. So there has to be a big rapport between facilities and the staff and the first responders coming in, for sure.
And that's a perfect example, Paul. So imagine the amount of time that would have been taken to examine that package. Wasted time. Right. Had you not had somebody be able to say, I know exactly what that is. It's X, Y, and Z. It's not A, B, and C.
Right. So, and sometimes we would get a little pushback from the staff saying, I don't want to go in the building. But so the way we explained it was sooner or later, you're going to go back in the building. And do you want to go back in there after I checked it and I don't really know what was in your classroom? Or do you want to check it with us to make sure that, there's something that's not out of place? Because I think it's sooner or later, we're all going back in that building.
100%. Right? And then to further your point, in a lot of like the common areas, there's surveillance video now. Yep. So that's another tool that's available now that might not have been as readily available in older schools, certainly not the old high school. Right. So, the use of technology obviously makes these things a little bit more streamlined.
Yeah. And the problem I had is, rule number one, when you're in that situation, is no cell phones, because you don't want to, something to trigger off. And my children were in the high school, and I was in Watertown where I live now. I've lived all my life, and my kids were being brought up here. My kids were in school, and they'd call me and say, can we go home now? They were out on the sidewalk. Do we have to go back in the building? Stop calling me. You do whatever the teachers tell you to do. Mm-hmm. We see you up on the roof. Can't you tell us? Can we go home from here? No. Stop using the cell phone. So that's the tough part. And with the instant communication now, it's so tough to keep control of the kids when they're on the sidewalk, and parents coming to get them when they see it happening. Crowd control, I think, is the toughest, because we're in an instant world now where, cell phone and social media just puts it out there as soon as it happens.
Oh, it makes it a million times more difficult. And I try to tell people that aren't in law enforcement, all of the teenagers, even adults with the handheld instant devices, whatever they are, that is tantamount to standing on a 20-story building, cutting open a feather pillow, letting the feathers go all over the place, and at the end be like, all right, go back and collect all the feathers.
Yeah, right.
That's what it's like trying to get people trying to stop the flow of bad information that comes out from these from all these devices.
Yep.
So you're spot on with that, Paul.
Well, I'm sitting here listening to this stuff, and I look at some of the things, Paul, we've looked at from a facility standpoint. Like most school buildings have in Massachusetts, many are what Dean went to in high school, which there was no cell signal in that high school. And so the students would leverage the Wi-Fi. And I sit here and say, well, something goes on like that they're trying to publish out information. Well, you could turn the Wi-Fi off. And I'm sitting here saying, I've always been trying to put more signal, more Wi-Fi strength, more everything for communication, but it can work against you. So there's that double edge, some things work well and some things don't.
Yeah, and you need the Wi-Fi for the cameras, and the principal's going to be putting out notices to parents, letting them know what's going on, and so it's a tough decision, especially as the principal. It's
the double-edged sword of technology, gentlemen.
Yep. So let me ask both of you this question because I don't know the answer. And Paul was saying, Tim, we've got Paul, Tim last week, got Paul Gonzalez next week. We're going to be loaded up with Pauls. I'm going to have to start saying we're getting the last names, but Paul, Tim last week, so we asked them, what are some takeaways that facility directors, and so to step back, Dean, what we're dealing with right now in school facilities operations and across the board, I think we talk about the great resignation is there is an alarming number of facility professionals that are either retiring or going into business elsewhere outside of the public sector. So we're trying to pull in the pool of the new blood, right? And they're coming into something that they have little to no experience in. They went to school, but they weren't managing the schools and the buildings. And so we're trying to give some insight and understanding to them specifically. And then, just in general for everybody, we've had a number of folks that have been in the business for a long time. They said, I never thought of that. And one of the things on that note was we asked Paul, Tim, what were some things that he would suggest free, no cost, low cost that a new person should do? One of the first thing he said is, work with your first responders, work with your local police and fire. Do you guys hear or know of that? Like, do police departments do like I'm sitting here saying, I want to call the local school and say, hey, how often are we doing a police walk through the building? Because one of the biggest things that Paul, Tim, and I talk about is door accessibility because people are lazy. Someone walks out a door, they find a rock. If it's within 6 feet, they'll grab it and they'll chalk that door. Mm-hmm. That just took a safe space and made it vulnerable. And I don't know the answer to this. I've never asked Paul, Tim this. Do police departments do like facility walkthrough audits on a quarterly, monthly, timely basis? Is this something that?
No. Go ahead.
They'll do assessments and come in and tell you what you can do to improve your security and harden your building a bit, but they're not going to go through looking for deficiencies in what the staff are doing or thing. It's not like an occupancy permit, with the building inspector coming through, but they'll come in. The police, I know, when I worked in Newton, they would come in pretty regular and go through the building and just say, you guys should replace these doors or you should get new hardware, and we would do that. Mm-hmm. But it's
how long ago was that, Paul?
I was I'm retired from Newton 4 years, so I'm saying 8, maybe 10 years ago that they were doing all that.
So the reason I asked that is that was a different iteration of how the public feels about the police ago. Yeah. So now, when you have police officers randomly showing up to a school to just walk through, even just to say hello to kids, you have some jurisdictions that have a problem with that.
Yeah, exactly.
And they, so now that's a problem doing that. So depending on your relationship between the school department and the police department, they may or may not want police officers in the school at all.
Right.
So, like we talked about, it all depends on what the relationship is, and it all depends on what the flavor of the month is. My guess now is those jurisdictions that don't want cops around, it's probably going to be a little easier for police officers to show up and do a walkthrough now,
right?
Than it was a couple days ago.
And that gets back to those relationships. I remember when was it in the 90s that early 90s that they funded the police on bicycles in the towns.
Mhm.
It was some program that the feds had, and I remember we had 3 police officers that would ride bicycles around town at night and just stop into the park when the kids were playing ball. Stop in. It was part of the Kids and Cops program. And then stop in and they would build relationships with these kids and seeing them, out of that norm of coming into the school when there's a problem or going somewhere when they would just show up and have conversations. They had actually, the police in my town had like playing cards, like a baseball card.
Mhm.
And the kids would collect them. The younger kids would collect them to see if they could get the whole police force, in their book. And they did that, building the relationship thing. And I thought that was great. And then that money dried up and that program went away.
And the program dried up with it.
Yep.
So, Dean, you bring up a good point, and I guess this will be part of the difficult conversation. And I appreciate what you're saying about kind of the feeling towards police officers today is different than it was yesterday, and it's different than it was 5 years ago. And that people would have a challenge with the jurisdiction stuff probably don't right now. That's a temporary fix. I think you've been a police officer long enough for a number of school shootings. I don't believe I was trying to pull up your bio on LinkedIn. I couldn't do it quick enough, but I don't believe you were a police officer. You may have been when Sandy Hook happened, which is the 10-year anniversary, which was 2012. I think I referenced something 2012, and you said that was before your time.
That was my former time in Stoughton.
Okay, so but you were an officer when
yeah, I'm on my 18th year now.
Okay, so you were part of when Sandy Hook happened, the deadliest school shooting. There was this outcry. It happened when Columbine. There were definitely the sadly the first biggest or the bigger of these where there was this outcry. There was this support. There was the needed assist. The people that said we don't need an SRO officer, want to have an SRO officer in every space. We've been through this. It doesn't last very long. Like, how do we get the anger? Because everyone's angry right now. I'm angry right now, right? You can't not be angry right now. How do we turn that anger into continuous improvement and support of getting things better? Because what happens, this just feels like maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm crazy, but I feel like this is kind of a revolving door. Something like this happens, everybody gets pissed off. Everybody wants to blame something or someone. They're all supportive of something. And then all of a sudden we go back to our normal lives while those families are still hurting. Those first graders that were at Sandy Hook, they're graduating next year. Like, they've gone through their entire school career without their friends that they had in the first grade. And they're suffering from this for the rest of their life. And all these people that were screaming and saying, we've got to do this, this, and this, and we have to be supportive. They're not supportive until the next time that it happens. They go back to whatever it was. How do we do something differently about that? I don't know that we have the answer here, but you're in it. Like, the fact that you've gone this many years and gone from being liked to being hated to being liked to being loved to be like, it's an emotional roller coaster ride,
to say the least.
Like, what do we do? And how do you, and then secondly, how do you handle it with this, like, your mindset of being positive, wanting to make a difference with Supply the Y? I think it's extraordinary, but how do we get people to remember something like this? Because I just feel like people forget after a period of time.
All right. So a couple different things. All great points. The first thing we need to do is we need to remember the old adage, it's a marathon, not a sprint. All right. Yeah. So these relationships have to be relationships that are built over time. They have to be maintained. It's just like anything else in your life that can break down if it's not maintained. So these relationships have to be maintained. They have to be fresh, and they have to, it's like a marriage. You got to put time and effort into these things. Sometimes you're going to be on the wrong side of arguments, but at the end of the day, we got to come back together and remember what it was that brought us there in the first place. Secondly, we got to stop with the "what have you done for me lately" mentality. Yeah. There's way too much "what have you done for me lately." Well, nothing's happened for a year, so I guess the coast is clear. Or some school resource officer 1,000 miles away maybe was a little heavy-handed with a kid, so now I'm going to take it out on you. and now you're out of the school because of some guy or some gal in some place you've never met, you've never been. They did something that nobody would condone, and now they're holding you accountable. It's a phenomenon with police officers where it's probably one of the only professions where somebody can make a mistake hundreds, thousands of miles away from you. You've never met, you've never trained with them, anything, and you're being held accountable for it.
Right.
It's so we got to get rid of that too. We got to start remembering that people, even though I wear a uniform, and my other police officers wear a uniform, we're at the end of the day, we're individual, and we're people just like anybody else. And one of the jokes I make is I talk about Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, a lot of people don't realize, like, Jeffrey Dahmer was like a chocolatier, worked with candy or something like that. A lot of people don't know that. But I tell people, but I bet you still eat a Snickers from time to time, don't you?
Yeah, right.
And everybody, like, you know what I mean? It gets a good laugh out of people. People didn't stop eating candy because this guy was murdering people and putting body parts in a freezer. They didn't stop eating candy and that kind of stuff. So why is it that police officers, when there's a bad actor, and it is not the norm, a bad actor here and there tends to ruin it for everybody. And
those are the ones that you see. That's what takes over the conversation and the headline. I mean, I deal with the same thing. I had 100 custodians when I was in Newton, right? I probably had 5 that I'd call foul balls, but those are the ones that, and all of the custodians get pegged with that bad rap.
Correct.
Because those 5 guys want to act out, and it's not right. There's 95 guys that are doing the right thing.
So and Paul, that's a great point. So to go back to what you were saying, Josh, we also have to acknowledge that when that mindset starts creeping in, we got to call ourselves on it. We got to be honest with ourselves and look in the mirror and say, hey, wait a minute, that mindset's creeping in where now I'm kind of lumping everybody in the same pot, unfairly or fairly. Because, if a cop 1,000 miles per hour does 1,000 miles away does something awesome, does that mean every other cop is just as awesome?
Right.
Of course not.
Right.
People, we're not the sum of the best things that we've ever done, and we're not the sum of the worst things that we've ever done. We're all somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. So we have to acknowledge those universal truths in order to get to where you're talking about. But that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of self-reflection. And I just don't know, as a society, if we're ever going to get back to that.
And I think that crowd thinking, that crowd mentality takes over. And I might be oversimplifying it, but I always noticed that in a school, when the teachers sat together in the teachers' room, in their break room, and 1 or 2 of them said, geez, that bathroom's dirty. All of a sudden, the bathroom's dirty, and that's getting bigger and bigger. And that is definitely oversimplifying what we're talking about. But it's the same thing. Now with social media, someone puts it on Facebook that they got a dirty bathroom in the school. Next thing you know, I got parents calling me saying that I heard that there's a crack bathroom in the school.
You hear it 3 times and it's true. And the teachers' lounge, and the teachers' lounge is the most toxic room anywhere in the world. I'm not going to change the subject on this, but that I actually saw one of my childhood teachers, and I made reference. I was like, you guys used to always sit in the teachers' lounge and badmouth me. I remember it, and I remember you come out of there like laughing. They could smoke back then in the teachers' lounge, so it's called smokers' teachers' lounge.
But it's that crowd thought process that happens, and then everybody thinks it's right because their crowd and the people they're talking to, and then it just swells from there.
And the story gets more and more fantastic. It's like a fishing story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The further away from the person that actually happened who tells it, the bigger the fish gets.
It's like my high school athlete story. The older I get, the better I was.
Yes.
Same here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just wrote this down as like, I wrote this down that I just don't see it often, which is a desired outcome. Everybody's angry right now, and everybody's talking about all of the things, but I don't think people come together in communities and states and the country and say, all right, what's our desired outcome, and how do we get there, and how do we stay the course?
Oh, they do talk about a desired outcome, Josh.
They just don't sit.
It's not something that's tangible. It's not something that can be measured. You know what I mean? Like, for example, one of my favorites is when, people like, end racism.
Yeah.
There's nobody in the world that would love for racism to be ended more than me. But that's not, how do you measure that?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, goals have to be something that can be measured, and so it's got to be a little more specific, and there has to be steps along the way that can be
Right.
also measured, that can be taken to reach that ultimate goal.
It has to become a lifestyle.
Mhm.
It really does. It's you have to work at it constantly with a lot of people, and everyone's got a different thought process.
Well, to the end racism point, I think that's what the majority of people are talking about after something like this happens. Is, we have to do everything all at once and figure out, abolish guns, have 7 million mental health counselors, and do all this. One of the things that I was thinking about this morning that I tried not to watch any of the news is, and I just don't see it, is this trying to get to say something. It's the greatest saying: see something, say something.
Yeah.
And people just don't adapt to it. And I think I think there needs to be a collaborative effort, if there isn't, between the school and the police. They all say it, but how do we get them to do it? I mean, you've got this woman that was tagged in post with the murderer yesterday, that tagged her with gun pictures and all this other stuff, and she didn't say anything until after everything happened and said, "I barely knew him. I don't know." That's messed up.
Right.
And I don't know how we get the building people to feel comfortable to not put their phone up to take a video, but pick their phone up to dial 911, or pick their video up to call the school superintendent's office or something.
Well,
So are you talking about facilities people, Josh?
I'm just talking about people in general. I'm talking about how do we get the word and the communication to, and it's an intertwined with everybody. That's the schools. That's everybody in the schools, not just facilities. I'm going off a little bit on this. Is how do we build these programs for working together? Because I think did the police start to see something, say something?
So that was driven largely by the police. But what happened, Josh? Because again, for every good deed, there's always a bad side to it, right? So what happened? Yeah. See something, say something. I'll give you a bad example of see something, say something. So I was working midnights, and we got a call probably around 6:45 in the morning. It was a rainy morning. Two suspicious males in the neighborhood.
Okay.
Pretty vague, right?
Yep.
They were, what are they doing? Oh, they're wearing hoodies. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I was in my route. So I go up there, we fly up there, and you know what it is? It's two school-age black kids walking to school wearing hoodies because it's raining out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They weren't in anybody's yard. They were just walking up the street.
Yeah.
And somebody wanted to roust them.
Yeah.
And used us as the police as the tool to harass these kids.
Mm-hmm.
That is the bad side of the see something, say something, because once you put it out there, people will be like, well, they were suspicious to me.
Right.
And then what do you do at that point? Because you told them to see something, say something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it can go wrong with that. And luckily I'm fortunate for all involved that I was dispatched to that call, and I knew exactly what it was when I got there. I didn't even so much as say a word to those two young men. To this day, I don't know if they ever knew that we were there for them. Because I drove, I saw exactly what it was. I'm like, they're walking up to the school bus.
It's raining out.
So I got on the radio. So they're walking up to the school bus. It's raining out. Do you have the callback number for the caller? Because I want to talk to him.
Yeah.
They call back the caller. Guess who doesn't want to? Guess who won't answer the phone on the callback?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because they probably were scanning the frequency, so they heard me over the radio. They probably were like, I want to talk to this person, because I knew exactly what it was. It was somebody trying to use the police as a means to harass these young kids that were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. They were going to school, protecting themselves from the rain, and they were going to get their education.
I think I heard a story about a young black man walking in the rain, walking home after, I think, walking a girl home because she was locked out of the high school or something like that, and reluctantly took a ride. And I think he ended up a police officer, right?
It's a fact. Yeah. It's a fact. So you going to tell it since you brought it up?
No, I want you to tell
Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
All right. So this goes back to, this is 1992, I believe. And, we spoke about sports a little bit earlier. I played football, basketball, and track. So I We had played one of the faraway schools on a Tuesday night. And, when I went to school, I graduated in 94. So there weren't nobody had a cell phone. You know what I'm saying? You had, if you were lucky, you had a pager. So we get back to the school. It's late. The custodians locked us out. And we're talking it's basketball season. So it's probably late January, early February. And it's one of those 39-degree rainy nights. Awful night. So we get back there. There's no way into the school. She doesn't have a ride. I don't have a ride, and we have no way to call for a ride. So after waiting around for a little bit and realizing that her parents aren't coming and neither are mine, I said, we might as well just start walking. I'll walk into your house, and then I'll go home afterwards. So we're walking. It's an absolute deluge out. Next thing you know, I see bright white lights coming from behind us, and I hear over a loudspeaker, "What are you two doing out there?" And I'm like, oh, man. Now, keep in mind the time frame now. This is right around Rodney King.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, here I am, 16, 17 years old. I'm thinking, all right, well, this is my time. This is my Rodney King moment. Now, here I am, black guy, walking with a young white girl. I'm about to get into it. I turn around, I see it's my worst nightmare. I see it's a police car. And I'm like, so I put my hands up. I got my varsity jacket on. I'm like pointing to my name. I'm like, it's me. It's Dean Jenkins. I'm a basketball player. And he's like, I'm not talking about that. He's like, what are you doing out in this rain? So now I'm confused because I'm like, it's not a crime to be out in the rain, but I'm getting yelled at. What seems like I'm getting yelled at over a loudspeaker while being in the rain. And he's like, come over here. So he calls us over. He's like, get in. I'll give you a ride. What are you doing walking? So we get in the car. I sit up front. She sits in the back. We drop her off first. And after we drop her off, I'm a little more at ease. But I could see that he saw that I was nervous. So what does he do? He looks over at me, puts on 94.5 WZOU, the Zoo Cat. So that was the first hip hop radio station. And he smiles at me a little bit and then keeps driving. So now I can see he's trying to build a bridge with me. And so I let my hair down a little bit and I say, hey, you listen to hip hop? And he's probably about 30 years old, white guy. He turns around to me and he says, what am I supposed to listen to? And that gave me an aha moment. And at that point, the walls broke, and him and we started talking about everything from Rodney King to what was going on around town. Hell, I was even telling him about my fear of police because I heard there were 2 racist cops in town. He goes, really? What are their names? I named 2 names. Guess who's driving the cruiser? One of the 2 names I mentioned is driving the cruiser.
Wow, how about that?
You can't make this stuff up. So he starts laughing, and he's like, I'm this person. So now I'm like, oh, I just stepped in it. But luckily, he shrugged it off. We sat in my driveway for a little bit, probably about 35, 40 minutes in my driveway. My parents are peeking out through the curtains. They probably think he's there to make a death notification because they hadn't seen me. Keep in mind, it's late now, and they haven't heard from me. They haven't seen me. And they see this cop car in their driveway not coming to the door. So I get out. My parents, they come running. They come over. Like, what was that about? Just that? You all right? And I'm like, I had a great time. I just met Officer so and so. And long story short, him and I are still friends to this day, based on that encounter. So it just shows you that first of all that assumptions are blinding.
Yeah.
But hypotheses that's how you should guide how you treat people. And that's not my saying. That's from Chris Voss. He's a great negotiator. But it's true. My assumptions about the police blinded me. I wasn't even trying to see this guy. He had to do all this work to get me to drop my walls. But then now that I got to know him, now my hypothesis, my all of the data I collected on this person, I said, you know what? Maybe I got it a little wrong here, and I'm treating people the wrong way without giving them a chance. Kind of like what people did to me when they saw me, big black kid. They, a lot of people were afraid of me. And then they get to talk to me and kind of see what's in my head and maybe drop their walls a little bit. Yeah. Long-winded story, but it was important based on what
that is. And
that's a great teaching moment right there.
And years later, here he is.
Almost 30 years later, I take that with me.
Yeah. I want to get back to say something because I had an idea, but the comments aren't popping up on our app, so I'm scanning the social media and we've got a mutual friend from Mr. Rick Tremble says, great to see my favorite podcasters working together to raise awareness and make this world a better, safer place. And Dean Luke says hi.
Hey,
So,
Rick, Luke.
Luke. Yeah, Luke's
Oh,
listening in.
I want to say hello to Rick because Rick obviously
Yep.
put him on. But Luke,
Yep.
he's one of my favorite young athletes. He's a tough competitor, and he plays against my son, and my son has a lot of respect for Luke and Luke's teammates. So,
Yeah. No, that's Rick was the Veterans Day podcast 2018, an awesome friend and supporter, and you two met in lacrosse years ago, and I came up in conversation, and now it's the big circle of friends here. So
your name preceded a big hug. So
yes.
that's what it was.
Paul, I just had this thought when we're talking about see something, say something, and the failure of see something, say something that could happen. There's no better trainers of establishing proper see something, say something than school custodians.
Absolutely.
Is that not a statement?
Yeah.
Like I'm sitting here going, how do we develop a program where custodians put together, because custodians see everything.
Right.
And they know everything that's going on in the school. And they're typically the ones that have to go say something, whether it be a principal or parents or something else. They have the best eyes of anyone. They would not call on a suspicious person because they know what a suspicious person would look like.
Right. And they see the kids in all of their different moments. I mean, let's face it, there's those Eddie Haskell type kids, and I know I'm dating myself with that talk to the principal and they're, telling him what a great tie he has and things like that. And then he turns around. Yeah. And then he turns around and he's, lighting the barrel on fire in the boys' room. But the custodian sees both sides of that. The kids, the staff, everyone will relax when the custodian's there and show their true self. If I was a first responder coming in and I needed to find out some information about staff, the building, anything, I would go to the custodian first. That'd be my first contact because they see it all and I hope they say something when it's something out of place. I think most of them have that background that they can.
I agree. From my experiences. I agree. Can I tell another quick story? So when I was a school resource officer, you spoke about doing like a building audit. So myself and one of the assistant principals of the middle school at the time, him and I, we dressed up in just regular clothes. I had a hoodie, and we went around at night to every single school in the jurisdiction, and we tried to break in. Besides being all kinds of fun, it was great to find some of the weak points. There was a school that had a security person stationed, and we both just walked by them just to kind of challenge them to see what they do. And we learned a lot from conducting that audit. And I can tell you right now, I always had a great respect for custodians and janitorial staff, but my respect went through the roof because there was one custodian that I pushed him a little bit, and he was ready to lay it all down to stop me from getting in that school. And this guy I'm significantly larger than this guy. And he had no idea who I was, and he was ready to give it his all to stop me.
That's his building. That's his building.
But you should have seen the relief though when I pulled off my hood and said, "Hey, you did a great job. It's me. It's Officer Jenkins. We're doing a building assessment, and I can't wait to write a letter of commendation for what you've done here and the amazing job you did, challenging me, making sure you heard me. Even so much as stepping in front of me to keep me from going into that school."
Yeah, I have a funny story that's similar. Mike, I had some custodians doing some extra cleaning on a Saturday in the high school. And, they know the rules. I told them no one comes in the building. You can't just let people in the building when it's closed on a Saturday. And so someone had tried to get in the building and they turned them away. Just wanted to use the bathroom. I says, sorry, there's bathrooms out in the fields. They can't, just politely tell them they can't be in there. So I called the custodian on Monday. I bring him to my office and I said, I hear you stop someone from coming in the building that, when the building was closed and they weren't authorized. He said, yeah. He says, that's the rules, right? Nobody comes in for any reason. If they're not injured and there's no reason for them to come in. I says, that was the mayor. You stopped the mayor from coming into the building.
Those are the rules.
Said, that was the rules, right? I said, that was the rules, but I just want to let you know that was the mayor. And he left my office, went unannounced to the mayor's office, sat outside the office with the secretary until he could talk to the mayor and say, I'm sorry, but those are the orders I was given.
Yep.
He said, I just wanted to talk to you and let you know that why I did that, even though you were the mayor. I didn't know you were the mayor, but still.
Was there any blowback?
Right. What's
Was
that?
there any blowback from the
Nope.
mayor?
Nope, not at all.
What are you going to do? I mean, that's the way it should be.
Right.
It's exactly the way it should be. But
this should be. I know it. I understand, yeah, it absolutely should be the way that it is what it should be, and I know that it isn't, and hopefully, folks can start to see that the rules are the rules, and safety and security of buildings. I mean, we have so many different examples. I have thousands of examples of where community stakeholders all but demanded to have you access to the school building, and why, and then something bad happened, and I mean, I don't even go into what the things that could have happened, or just it's crazy, and there needs to be set rules. It's not a community center. It's not a community center that anyone can use anytime they want to do whatever they want to prop doors, or now that we're getting smart doors. We talked about that last week with Paul Tim, with Bluetooth enabled doors, so that now we're not even need to have card access. It's you've got a phone, you're assigned that access, and if you're getting a proximity of the door with your Bluetooth on, it will recognize that and unlock the door. Everybody shouldn't have a key. Just everybody's phone in town shouldn't have access to that door. Right. But people fight for it. So
in theory, I like it. In theory,
yep.
I like it. But obviously, being in law enforcement, I'm also looking at the glass half empty side of that too. How that could also be problematic at times.
Oh yeah. No, well, I again, when I was talking about Wi-Fi accessibility, cell coverage, I was trying to help cellular companies put repeaters in these. We tried to do one in one of your schools in Newton, Paul, I think. Yep. We tried to put the repeaters in for Nextel at the time. Yep, I remember that company. Yeah. And I was dead. That was 2004. We're in 2022, and I'm on a podcast with you guys, and I'm just going, well, maybe cell coverage and Wi-Fi accessibility isn't a good idea in a school building sometimes, and how do we control that? So,
although the funny part of that story is we did do one school on the south side of town, and we put the repeaters in, and it had some glitch in it, and it kept calling the state police 911.
Oh, really?
Kept showing up at the school at like 11 o'clock at night, because custodians would say, why? They said, there's a 911 call coming from this building. And we finally tracked it down. It was that repeater that was putting out the same signal somehow and hitting the state police dispatch.
Technology. So. Well, Dean, did I cover all the bases of police and what they? I had a bunch of stuff in here that I added in because I think
we rolled pretty good there.
I got on a soapbox, and then we started talking hot mic. I know, but I just want to make sure. I want to make sure I didn't miss any key points, and I came up with a see something, say something with custodians. I get circled in a big bubble here that I'm going to start pushing in my talks.
Yeah, I like to see something, say something, for, particularly from the custodians for a couple reasons. A, they are masters of their craft. As a whole, obviously, I'm sure you have some weak links in there, but I'd say as a whole, you're masters of your crafts, from at least the ones I've come in contact with.
Right.
Secondly, I think custodians do a phenomenal job of staying in their lane. They don't walk into English class and start telling people how to conjugate a verb. You know what I mean? Right. But they do a great job of saying, hey, listen, look, like if we were searching for something, saying, hey, what are you looking for? Maybe I can help.
Yeah.
And somebody, a smart police officer will drop their ego and say, this is exactly the person that I need to be talking to. Second, and the last thing is they're named people. Typically named and identifiable people aren't full of crap when they report things, because they know that you can come right back to them if they give you bad information. So I can't say enough about the job that the custodians have done, at least in my jurisdiction. I'll say it by name, and the custodians in Stoughton, Massachusetts are top notch. They're unbelievable. They do a fantastic job. Even when I'm coaching my kids' teams, and at the end of the night, they're right there. They are. They're right there.
And everyone knows them from the kindergarten student up to the senior that's graduating. The staff know them. The superintendent knows them, and it's one of the things that they taught us when we went through our relocation, when we leave a building and we have to get out for whatever reason, and go to that safe space. what they told us was have the custodian there at the other end. It makes the kids feel comfortable coming. They don't know what's happening and why they're leaving their building and going to another one. But if the custodian's at the other end, that gives them a calming feeling because it's someone they know, someone that everybody knows. Everybody knows Mr. Tom. Everybody knows Mr. Jim. Right? It's funny how they give them the Mr. in the first name usually.
Yeah. That's very new school to do that. It was Mr. and last name when
now it's first name basis. Yeah,
that could be a whole nother show.
Yeah,
right. What happened to respect for elders?
Yes.
Oh man.
Yeah. Well, it changes, right? It's I still have people that are not much now that I'm older. I'm going to be 50. I still have people. And when I was growing up, they were probably only 10 years older than me, but they were way further along the road of adulthood than I was. And I always call them by their last name. Billy Nixon, who was on my podcast, was one of my employers for a long time. I'll never forget, but we rented a space from him, his warehouse, for our water business, my dad and I, and he walks in and he says, Billy says, Mr. Nixon, I'll refer to him as, but he walks in and my dad says, hey, Billy, good morning. And I turned and I said, hey, good morning, Billy. And my father looked at me and says, you'll never call him Billy again. You call him Mr. Nixon. He rents us space. You show him respect. You do this, you do that. And I tell him all the time, like, I can't call you Billy. I call you Mr. Nixon. Same thing with Paul, Greg Mesher, his down in Myrtle Beach, his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Mesher, they say, call me Donna, call me Walter. I'm like, all right, got it, Mr. and Mrs. Mesher. It's just routine. But,
I think it's funny. All these years later, my oldest son's 40 years old, and I coached his youth hockey team when they were 8. And mine was Mr. A because they all couldn't say Anastasia. So they went with Mr. A. And they're 40 years old now. And they still, if they see me in the streets, they say, hey, Mr. A. It's just something that stuck with that crowd. But you're right. It's shifting. The times are changing.
I was hoping to get some questions from the chat. That's
quiet.
So I'm trying to scramble around. So sometimes this doesn't work. So we do have someone. I'm Dina in the LinkedIn. Karen Durr. He says, hi, I'd love to have you on my show too. So I'm sure he knows how to get a hold of you. But that's looking for you to be on their show. So looks like we got you another show opportunity. And Jeffrey Dahmer worked for Ambrosia Chocolate Company in California, making $8.75 an hour in 1985. So I was waiting to tell you guys that because I had it in my head as if I was practicing for Trivial Pursuit.
And that's my point. I'm sure that whoever people still go out, they still get their M&Ms or whatever candy that could be associated with Mr. Dahmer. They still ate it.
I didn't want to call BS on you, but I'd never heard that before, so I had to do a Google search to
my credit score go up in your eyes. My credit.
And now I will have that in my head forever. And I will know if anyone ever says, oh, I think he was a chocolatier, I'll say, yeah, he worked at Ambrosia Chocolate Company in California making $8.75 an hour in 1985. Boom.
Now you got the data to go with it.
Put me on your Trivial Pursuit number. Yeah.
Can I get the loan? Can I get that loan now?
Yep. Thank you very much. No, Dean, I'll tell you, this was great. It was informative. I'm glad, I called you this morning and Paul, I called you. I just wasn't sure to do this. And you both were like, yeah, let's go through. Let's keep doing it and let's do it. So
can't forget what happened, but we need to.
Yeah.
We're doing what's right by doing all this.
Yeah.
And even if I've made another friend now. If it's one at a time, we'll take them. And that's the way it's going. That's how we change the world. It's an evolution. It might be my grandkids that end up, with the change, but it's got to start somewhere.
Hey, don't steal my lines, Paul. I end my shows on that sometimes. All right, don't steal my thunder, big guy.
How about that? I've never even seen your stuff.
Well, we got a comment, and this is from. And I'm so glad to hear from you, my friend, and we need to catch up. He was, I think, assistant superintendent, both Denver and Washington, D.C. Public schools, and was executive director of ASBO International, and most importantly, an awesome friend, John Musso. He says, this discussion is right on target. More need to hear these types of discussions. Thank you. If there's somebody that understands education as a whole in the nation, I put him at the top tier of people in my world over the course of my career. I can remember meeting him. I think at the end of it, he probably would have been more reluctant. I picked him up at Logan Airport in 2005 when he was when his association was hosting an event at the Heinz Convention Center, and I have had great admiration, respect, and appreciation for him, and haven't talked to him in a while. So thanks, John. Great to see your name up there, and we're going to talk again. I think the last time I saw him was in Valdez, Alaska, a couple of years ago. So, this
is my point where I say, do you have a shout out, Josh?
You know what? I do. I do have a shout out. I've got one here. I want to do it. We're calling audibles every once in a while. I think that with everything going on, I want to do one. And with Dean being our guest, I want to do one for a school resource officer this week. Dean, what we're doing is one of the things, like Paul said, is, if we can help one person, or if we can connect one more good person and build our collection of good people together, we're doing okay. And I'm going to let you close out with your closing line if you want on that. But we want to make sure that we're reminding our audience that there are so many good people doing awesome things, and oftentimes with municipalities, local public servants, they don't get outside their island, right? They don't get outside their town, their community, and they get insulated, and they don't understand the great stuff that's happening all around the country, all around the world. So we recognize typically every week a facility director, a custodian, someone on the facilities maintenance and operations staff. But I think with this conversation, I wanted to do a school resource officer. I didn't have to go very far. First of all, there was a lot of them that have done something remarkable. But this one in particular, it is School Resource Officer Safe Student from Suicide Attempt. Was published on April 21st of this year. Two high school students were visibly concerned. It was lunchtime on a February day in 2022, and the boys said they needed to speak with Iowa School Resource Officer Jamie Fay immediately. The deputy with the Scott County Sheriff's Office invited them into his office, where he learned that another student might be in imminent danger. The boy had sent private Snapchat messages to a few people in which he indicated that he planned to harm himself. Fay sprang into action immediately, checking attendance records. To his dismay, he learned that the boy was not in school that day. The SRO contacted the boy's parents, who were away from home, and told them that he was on his way to their house. The parents had family friends meet the SRO and a patrol officer with a key. That was fortunate because no one responded when Fay was at the door knocking. The officers entered the house and found the boy unresponsive in his bedroom with shallow respirations and an elevated heart rate. A bottle labeled hydrocodone was nearby. A physician had prescribed the drug for the boy for a previous injury. A patrol officer administered a dose of the opioid reversal drug naloxone that he had on his duty belt. The naloxone worked, and the boy began to recover. Fay was grateful for the time he'd invested in building positive relationships with students like the two boys who reported the Snapchat message. I make it my goal to engage every day with as many students as I can by being present in the hallways between classes and visiting with them during lunch. Fay told Nasro at home athletic competitions, I engage with the student section. And Fa told Nasro about a unique way he gets to know students. The SRO had stickers made that bear a photo of his face. For some reason, the kids love those stickers, Fay said. But the only way to get one is to approach the SRO and personally request one. Unfortunately, Fay had not a chance to become familiar with the boy who attempted suicide. The SRO had no reason to believe the boy was in danger to himself. How might things have been different without an SRO? Fay says he hopes the boys who saw the Snapchat post would have informed someone else about it, but by going directly to the SRO, they significantly reduced the time required to get help to the boys' home. Fay's relationships with students have helped in other situations as well. My response with several agencies in our community improved interactions with our students and their families, Fay said. That story I pulled while we were doing this talk. I didn't read the story other than he saved a student from suicide, and we hit every single point of the importance of timing, saying something, knowing when to say something and who to say something, and the time savings. When you talked about the boiler room, having that direct point, that was a matter of seconds. You know, that student, if given 10 more seconds or a minute, that they probably wouldn't have recovered. So that was pretty darn powerful. Paul, as I always tell you, for whatever reason, I've got an enormous amount of luck on my side, whether it's pulling numbers out of my what and being accurate, or finding a story that ties directly in with this episode that is just hot mic'd. That is one. So Officer Faith, thank you. Probably not listening, but the Be Awesome at Facility Management podcast hosts and guests and listeners appreciate you. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
Well, that'll do it, Paul. Dean, you got any closing thoughts? Anything you want to wrap it up with? We don't want to steal any more thunder from you. And if you want to share how people can get a hold of you, you do professional development, you do speaking for organizations. Tell a little bit about that and close us out. And I'll give the closing line and see if we can get some reviews too.
All right, I'll keep it really quick because I got to go be a dad. That's my most important job. But I will say this. Thanks again for having me on, Josh and Paul. This has been an amazing conversation. It's conversations like this where we tackle difficult topics, polarizing subjects that are going to, one conversation at a time is what it's going to take to bring people together. So with that said, please follow me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Instagram. Check out Supply the Why. You see the logo here. We're on all your major podcast platforms as well. If you are looking for DE&I work, if you are looking for conversation facilitation about use of force or any other difficult topic, Supply the Why. We do custom-made trainings for that as well. So again, just reach out to me, let me know what you're looking for, and we can put something together for you. But that's basically it, folks. But I just please share this episode, get it out to everybody because people need to hear this and they need to see the kind of work that Josh and Paul are doing.
Yeah. No, thank you, Dean. I really appreciate you. I appreciate your friendship, always in your corner, my friend. And thank you. What you're doing is just so powerful for the world. Paul, we got a question before we go from Heidi Prisco. Wants to know if we see more schools switching to access control versus traditional keys. You're in a bunch of schools. Yeah.
Absolutely. All the new buildings now are going to card access or fob access. And a lot of the older buildings are being retrofit for it. There's much more control that way.
Awesome. Well, I think we covered all the questions that we got today.
All right.
Appreciate you all. Thanks again. Thank you for those that listen and watch. This will be on all podcast platforms on Thursday, maybe Friday. I want to put it all together. In the meantime, please thank you for following, sharing, and doing all that you're doing. It's okay to be angry right now, but let's carry this on. Let's continue to push to make a bigger difference, a bigger impact, so we're not having these conversations after tragedies like what happened yesterday. We appreciate all your ratings and reviews, comments, questions, concerns. Go to Paul at beawesome.com. Compliments, kindness, love, hugs, virtual hugs. Those come to me, Josh at beawesome.com.
Pays to be the boss.
Yeah, I'll pass some of that. I'll pass some of the good stuff on to Paul. But we don't. Paul hasn't gotten any email yet, so that's a good thing. So
that's a good thing.
But hang in there, everybody, and remember, if you can be anything, be awesome.